We're holding on Daf Chav Beis, Amud Beis, page 22b at the end of 22b. And we've been learning about the law of how much sunlight is permitted in a sukkah, how thick should the schach be, and we had over here the contradiction between the first Mishnah in the chapter and the first Mishnah in the first chapter and the Mishnah here in the second chapter that seemed to contradict it. What do I mean it contradicted it? Well, the Mishnah here said you need more shade than sunlight to be kosher. In the first chapter, it said if you have more sunlight than shade, it's not kosher, implying that if it's half and half, you have two opposite implications. From the first Mishnah, it says it's only invalid if it's more sunlight. It implies half and half is good. Here it implies you have to have more shade than sunlight. If it's half and half, it's not good. So you got a contradiction there. And so the Gemara gave a very vague answer to reconcile this contradiction. It just said here it's above and here it's below. Now, how does that answer the contradiction? Kan milmaila, kan milmata. The Gemara uses these four words, and there's supposed to be an answer to this major contradiction and question in halacha. And what it boils down to, I mean, we did see a machlekes, an argument between Rashi and Tosfos, and the way we understood Rashi was that milmaila, if it's above, if it's half and half at the level of the schach, at the level of where the branches are, if it's half empty and half schach, so that will mean that the sun will extend and expand as it goes down into the sukkah, and you're going to end up with a majority of sunlight, and then it's going to be invalid. It's half and half on the schach level. It's majority of sunlight on the floor level. And then that would make it invalid as a kosher sukkah. However, milmata, if below it's half and half, then we say that above it must be, if below is half and half, then above it must be majority schach. It must be that the majority of it is shade, and therefore it's kosher. So that was the way Rashi learned it. So what happens if it's half and half on top? It's not kosher. What's the reason? Because it's majority sunlight below. What happens if it's more majority shade on top? If it's majority shade on top, so even if below it's half and half, it's going to be kosher. The commentaries are find this problematic. So what's Rashi's conclusion? What do you go by? Do you go by the schach level, or do you go by the floor level? And do you need majority, or is half and half kosher? So let's think about it now that we understand what we're dealing with and the problem with understanding Rashi. Now we got to look at Rashi a little more carefully. And so again, let's think again. He says milmaila, above, when above it's half and half. So that means that below it's going to be more sunlight, because if you have half branches, half empty space, the sun is going to expand and go down, and it's going to be more sunlight than shade. That makes sense. And what's the problem with that? Sounds like we follow the floor level. Sounds like we follow the floor level. The floor level needs to have at least half and half. And if it's majority sunlight, it's a problem. That's what it sounds like, right? So in other words, on top you have half and half. Below you have too much sunlight. It's not kosher. And the reason Rashi says is because there's more sunlight than shade on the floor. Okay. Then what about the other case? The other case is where above it's equal. I'm sorry, where below it's equal. And that means that above there's a majority. So what do you go by? The first thing Rashi says is you go by the floor of the sukkah. The second case, Rashi says, if the floor is half and half, then for sure the schach is majority. So you go by the schach level. The first case, Rashi says, you go by the floor level. It's invalid because the floor level has too much sunlight. The second half of Rashi says that you go by the roof, the schach level, and the schach level has majority. So the commentaries struggle with this Rashi to the extent that one of the commentaries brings an earlier Gemara, which doesn't exactly talk about the same case. The earlier Gemara talked about a case where you have, it was a Mishnah, talked about a case where you have metal spits that are half of the schach is metal and half of the schach is kosher schach. And the conclusion of that Mishnah, it was a debate among the commentaries, Rav Papa and Rav Ada Barava, maybe. There were two opinions. There was Rav Papa and then the other opinion on Daf Chav Beis. Who was the other opinion on Tesvav? It was the opinion of Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yeshua. Okay, so it was Rav Papa, and there was an argument over there. Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yeshua, and Rav Papa had said that half and half is good enough. It's called parutz ka'emet, is kosher. When you have breached the same amount as solid, it's kosher. And he used that law to apply to when you have kosher schach and non-kosher schach. Now, this Gemara, we're really not dealing with that same case. We're dealing with kosher schach and empty space, which don't necessarily have the same rules. But it's possible to extend that case, that law, and say maybe it should apply here, at least in theory. You might consider such a thing and say here also maybe you could say the same thing. In fact, Tosfos does bring it over here, such an idea, that bringing that concept to the extent he even asks this question on Rashi. Why does Rashi say there's a problem if you have half? If half of it is schach and half isn't, half is kosher schach and half is empty space. Tosfos asks, he says that should be fine because parutz ka'emet is kosher. If you have half breached and half solid, that's kosher. That was Rav Papa's view, and we passed him like Rav Papa before when it came to kosher schach and non-kosher schach. So Tosfos sees that should be applied also when there's kosher schach and empty space. Tosfos understands that it should be applied. Now in Rashi, he doesn't talk about it. So you don't necessarily have to say that there's a connection. You could say that law of Rav Papa is a law when it comes to kosher schach and non-kosher schach on the same sukkah, and not about empty space. And our Mishnah is talking about empty space, or our Gemara is talking about empty space. So you could say really it's a different rule. Now, so the concept that Rashi brings over here, I mean, there's two questions really. Do we go by the schach where it is on the level of the do we go by how much schach there is, where it is at its level, the level of the schach, or do we go by the shade and sunlight on the floor of the sukkah? That's one question. And the other question is, do we need majority, or is half and half good? So you got really these two issues to deal with. One of the commentaries wants to say, oh, I was in the middle of mentioning that there is a commentary that connects this Gemara with the page 15 and Rav Papa and Rav Huna Breda, Rav Yeshua, those two opinions about parutz ko'imed, if it's breached, if that's equal, if that's the same, if there's if it's half kosher schach and half non-kosher schach, you connect that idea here. So he wants to say that Rashi's really talking about these two opinions, and that's why Rashi contradicts himself over here, because really he's trying to cover all grounds. And he's saying, even according to the other view that you need majority, it's still going to be understood here. You could fit the other view as well. In other words, so Rashi is really talking, at one point it implies like half and half is okay. Another place it implies like you need to have majority. And that could be based on the argument that we had before, when you have kosher schach and non-kosher schach, is half and half good or not good? And that's how you could maybe answer Rashi over here. Another way of explaining it, and this might be a little easier, is to explain that it's not about seeing the schach above at the schach level or at the floor level. It's about the entire picture of how much shade there is and how much sunlight there is. And therefore, what Rashi is saying is that he says when you have equal schach and equal empty space, so what ends up happening is in the whole picture, you've got more sunlight than shade. He says, however, if there is in the sukkah on the floor level, if you have more shade than sunlight, then it must be that it's equal on the schach level, and then it's that would mean that it's equal on the schach level. You have equal. One second. If you have equal on the floor level of shade and sunlight, so it's for sure that there's more schach than sunlight, and therefore it's kosher, not because we need to have majority on the schach level, but because the entire picture is going to be more shade than sunlight. So as we look at the whole sukkah, is the sukkah majority sunlight? So really, it depends. If the schach on top is half and half, then the whole sukkah is more sunlight. If the sukkah below is half and half, then, in other words, on the floor level, it's half and half, then the whole sukkah is majority sunlight, and that's going to be kosher. So that's one way of understanding Rashi, that in other words, that it's really looking at the sukkah, the whole picture of the sukkah, not just the floor, not just the schach level. It's how much throughout the sukkah is there shade. It's throughout the sukkah. It's not on the floor level. It's the whole sukkah. Is there more shade than sunlight? And that would be an understanding to fit in Rashi. Again, what we were trying to deal with is getting down to the bottom line. What do we look at? Do we look at the schach level, or do we look at the floor level? Does it need to be majority, or is half and half good? And it would come out that you need to have majority, but it's we're looking at the whole picture. Yes, Jeffrey.
So since when we talk about the thickness, we're looking at the schach, and we say we don't worry about what you can see through it. It seems to me you have to use the same judgment. You have to use the schach to decide. And if it's a cloudy day or sunny day, if it's evening or if it's morning, the light is always going to change, no matter what climate you're in. So I think what you have to look at based on the.
So you're comparing the thickness of the schach when it's too thick to when it's too thin.
Right.
And you're saying that maybe it has a similar law, that it boils down to the same thing, that just like you can't have too much shade, you also can't have too much sunlight. just like you can't have too much sunlight, you also can't have too much shade. And that's the way you're understanding it. See, I don't see it that way. I would not have learned it that way. I would say the law is. I'm sorry, what did you just say?
You can't determine it from the floor. You have to determine it from what's on top.
That you should decide from what's on top, and it all boils down to like one general law. But I don't know if that's true, because if we're saying that the main concept of a sukkah is shade, and then we also say that you do need to see the stars, I don't know if that's the same rule. I would say they're two separate rules. On the one hand, it's all about shade. Now, if you want to overdo the sukkah with shade, there could be a separate problem that is similar to a house. There could be another issue that, you know what I mean, that it shouldn't be too thick. You should be able to see stars for whatever side reason, Kabbalistic reason, I don't know, that they're supposed to, but not that the law of seeing the stars is the same law as providing shade. In other words, I see the law of providing shade as it's really a separate entity than the law of seeing stars. And that's why maybe that if you did overdo your schach and you put it solid, it's still kosher. It happens to be, if it can't rain in it, that would be problematic. Then it's really like a house. But if you did solidly put the schach, so I don't know if they're really, just because the one rule is dependent on the general picture, let's say, of schach, that generally it's more shade than sun, and you look at the whole sukkah, it doesn't necessarily, and again, that's one way of understanding Rashi. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to understand it. There is another way, and I did mention that it's based on two different opinions on page 15. So that's another way of learning it. But even the way I said it, that you look at the whole sukkah, and we need to have a majority shade in the whole sukkah. I don't know if that would contradict it if you say, but you also need to see stars because of a separate law. You know what I mean? I don't see that it's the same. It's not based on the same issue. Seeing stars, is not necessarily connected to the idea that it has to be a sukkah l'shem tzel.
Seeing stars can't always be determined. If it's cloudy, if it's a situation that we have this year was quite late, was late in October. The weather in Northern Europe was different from what we have here in the United States. So I don't think that you can really ever judge it by seeing stars. And I also don't understand why they don't mention the moon, because the holiday is specifically at the full moon. I always show the kids love it, that you can see the moon fully through, but they want something very small. They want to say that something very small can be seen.
When it says seeing stars, I think it means that when the stars are visible, then seeing stars. It's not talking about cloudy or not cloudy. It's talking about when it's no cloud, when it's visible, when the stars are visible. Then we're basing it on, can you see the stars? Too many stars, not enough stars.
But the sukkah has to be good in the daytime. The sukkah has to be good in the daytime. Therefore you're judging it based on the seeing stars part, and then what happens in the daytime happens in the daytime. What happens in the cloud, it happens in the cloud. But it's all judged on the fact that when things are clear and you're seeing the stars, then we're determining you're seeing stars. It's like the end of Shabbos. You say when 3 stars are visible. You don't say, well, what if it's cloudy? It doesn't matter. When the sky would be clear, and then we're judging it on the stars. It's visible or it's not visible. You can't say, well, now the Shabbos ends differently because it's cloudy. Well, for other rules, you can't do that. And so there was the Alter Rebbe wrote a long essay about people lighting candles. And he said they don't light candles early enough. And they couldn't determine it because of the weather. So there was a case when you really had to know precisely when the sun was going to go down, okay, whether the weather was good or not. So I sort of look at it a different way because all these things are affected by the weather. So
yeah, but if you look at your calendar and it says when is Shabbos out, says Shabbos is out at 6:47. You can't say, well, it's cloudy tonight, so Shabbos is out at a different time.
Exactly. And you can't say, I don't see the stars, so I don't know. But they have clocks. I was supposed to be able to do this without clocks.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Jeffrey, what this developed into. I think your initial point was a very interesting point initially when you started, and that was that the fact that there's a law about seeing stars and there's a law about how much shade you need. And you wanted to say if the seeing stars is connected to how much schach there is, then the amount of shade and amount of sunlight is also should be dependent on the actual schach. That was a very interesting point that you tried to make. I personally disagreed. I don't think that it's connected, although I think it's a nice insight that you thought of. Now to develop that into issues of weather and things like that, I think that's a whole different discussion. And I don't know that that there is any concept of weather affecting the halacha of when Shabbos begins or not. As far as I know, as David mentioned, if it wasn't cloudy, or it would, if this is when Shabbos starts. So just because it's cloudy, or if you're locked up in a dark room, it shouldn't really make a difference. Shabbos is Shabbos, but again, I think that's a very different discussion.
Okay, fine.
But I think it's a good point what you mentioned, that and it really is connected to what we were talking about the what does it go by? What do we, does it go by the level of the schach, or does it go by the whole sukkah, or the floor of the sukkah? Different ways of understanding it. Right. And again, it is a topic of discussion in the commentaries. Okay, and that was the first Gemara here that I should say that there are two Gemaras before the Mishnah. This first paragraph before the Mishnah, this was what was discussed. We did Tosfos's pshat, that he said that there's a difference of when you're looking from above or looking from below, and basically when you're looking from, Tosfos seems to spell out that it all boils down to the level of the schach, which does fit with what you're saying, Jeffrey, that it does depend on the actual schach amount. And he says half and half is kosher. So Tosfos seems to spell out his halacha more clear, that it goes by the schach level. You need half and half. You don't need majority. And the only thing is, if you're looking from below and you see half and half, you're wrong. It's not half and half. Because when you look from far away, the empty space is going to look smaller than it really is. And if it looks half and half from below, it's really much more empty space. And therefore, it's going to be non-kosher. If you look from the level of the schach from above and you see that it's half and half, then you're right. Then it is half and half. So Tosfos does say that it goes by above, and that's the way Tosfos learns. And then Tosfos, the next little line of the Gemara, where it mentions that people say that something that's a zuz above is an isra below. That also depends on how you learn. If you learn like Rashi and Tosfos, according to Rashi, if it's a zuz, which is small, above, then it's going to be a lot of sunlight below. It's like an isra, a much bigger coin, below. So half and half above would mean that there's a lot of sunlight below. The way Tosfos learned was that if you're looking, he first of all, he translates isra to be smaller than a zuz. And he says, if it's kizuza mila'el, if it's like a zuz above, then when you're standing below, it's going to look only like an isra, like a smaller coin. So he translates the coin size differently, and he translates the Gemara differently. But his conclusion is it goes by the actual level at the schach level, and half is also kosher. Okay, so that was the the first little piece. Then the final piece before the Mishnah was talking about Ma'uba Kimin Bias. It talked about when you have thick schach, and this is what Jeffrey was bringing up, when you have thick schach, if it's like a house. So even if you don't see the stars, it's kosher. some of the commentaries bring out implies that you really should see the stars, meaning it's kosher, but what's preferable? Should you be able to see the stars? And the question really is also, even if it's preferable to see the stars, does that mean that throughout the sukkah you should be able to see stars and make sure that it's not too thick anywhere? Or is it just like one or two areas? I was told some people poke holes with a pole after they put their schach on. They poke a few holes with a pole so that there's no shilas, they could see stars. So even though it's thick throughout the sukkah, but they actually could see some of the stars, they go there, they poke a few holes, and they yaitza this concept of seeing stars, which possibly is good enough. But the Gemara in the Mishnah don't really make it very clear how important it is to see the stars. All the Mishnah really says is that if you did make it thick and you don't see the stars, it's still kosher. That it does say. It's definitely kosher if you don't see any stars. So you're supposed to be able to see stars? So yeah, some of the commentators want to bring that out, that it seems like it's kosher if you did it. It's like the diavad, it's kosher, but it really is better to see stars. But even then, it's a little vague to what extent, are you obligated to see stars? And the Gemara says, the Gemara then talks about koich vechama, which means the shine, the rays from the sun. What about even if you don't see stars, but are you getting any of the light from the sun? So the Gemara says that's a machlokes Beis Beis Hillel. If the sunlight can't even get through it, so not which to me seems like it's more schach than you could actually see stars, but the sunlight, in other words, you can't see stars, but maybe the sunlight could get through it. And on that, Beis Shammai says that if the sunlight can get through it, it's kosher. But if the sunlight can't get through it also, so you don't see stars, and it's even more schach that the sunlight can't get through it, the rays of the sun can't even get through it, then it's Beis Shammai says it's puzzle. Beis Hillel says it's kosher. Yes, David.
In the Steinsaltz here, he says that the rays of the sun, koch vechama, most commentaries are saying that it's talking about the rays of the sun that appear like stars through the schach. However, the Rambam explains that it refers to very large stars that can be seen even in daylight.
Mm-hmm. So the first pshat is the common pshat, and that's the way we were learning it.
Right.
Thank you, David, for bringing the Rambam that if it's a very, very large stars, the Beis Shammai holds if you can't even see the large stars, then you've got a problem. According to Beis Shammai, but the halacha generally doesn't follow Beit Shammai. Just pull up over here in the Mu'ubakim in bias. Sukkah needs to lechatchila. You should see the big stars, and this is the way the Rambam learns that you should see the big stars, and some say you should also see the stars that are seen at night, the regular stars. And that's brought by many of the commentaries. Mikol Makam, however, b'diavad, when you have a very thick schach, it's kosher, even if you don't see stars. Even if you don't see stars, and some say if it's so thick that the rain can't fall in, even with a lot of rain, it's puzzle because it's similar to a house. So that would be a going beyond the over the limit. And the Pri Megadim says that would apply even if you have a place that's 4 tfachim thick. That's 4 tfachim, that it has this thickness of schach. But if it's a 4 tfachim area, that would be a big problem, because that area, that rain can't fall through. So don't think that, as long as some rain can fall through at certain parts of your sukkah, that should be fine. No, it could be problematic if there's any area where that's 4 tfachim, where rain can't fall through. That would be a problem as well. So that's an interesting halacha based on this discussion about the rain.
Rabbi?
Yes.
What about Dofen Akuma? How would that apply with regards to the thickness of the schach and being able to see stars through the, if that area was,
it's not a problem.
the
It's the doifen. That's really the wall, Moshe. That's not the schach. That you don't see stars through. You can't sit under. It's doifen akuma is just part of the wall that you're not expected to see any stars on.
But where the schach extends beyond the wall and it leans over, how would that play into it?
No,
if you could see.
If the schach leans over on top of the non-kosher schach, is that what you mean? If the schach leans over that?
Yeah.
So you have an overhang, and you have some schach on top of the overhang.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can't sit under the overhang. The overhang is not, so there's no need for that, for you to be able to see stars from there, because that's not part of the sukkah. It's where the schach is. That's where the seemingly would be an inyan to either see stars, or at least it has to rain, should rain through there. There seems to be different opinions about the rain. The rain is not it's not like everyone agrees about the rain, but there's definitely such views that it's puzzle if the rain
it's schach and the walls. That's why the schach sticking out is not making a sukkah. You're sitting under the schach, but you got no walls around you on this outside the sukkah.
Why don't you have walls?
Because you're sitting outside the sukkah, and he said the schach is extending out past the sukkah.
Oh, that's
and
your
you
case,
can't sit
Moshe?
under that because you have schach, but you don't have walls.
Okay, but
If you have one wall, it's good.
Right.
If you have
Okay, one
poles,
wall.
If you have
If
one
your
wall, that would
poles-
be good. What?
but if you have poles that are acting like walls, according to I forgot the law, where the pole acts as a wall, and they're like successive poles, wouldn't that, with the overhang, wouldn't that be considered also like a sukkah?
So I'm not sure. You'll have to draw your picture, your case, and I'll try to see on the
Right.
All
The
right.
overhang over the wall itself, and then you have 3 poles outside of the sukkah, which also acts like.
You'll have to draw it. You have to draw it, Moshe. It's a little confusing. Okay.
But we're-
So we're going to continue. So we just started the Mishnah on Friday. So let's do the Mishnah again. We're on page 22b, and we're about 7 lines from the bottom of the page. So the Mishnah 22b. A person makes his sukkah on top of a wagon, or on top of a boat. And we mentioned that the problem with the wagon is that it moves, and the problem with the boat that there's a lot of wind. There's no nothing blocking the wind. There's no mountains that block the wind, so on. And nevertheless, the Mishnah says shteira. The sukkah is kosher. The Mishnah continues, it says, and you can go onto that sukkah on Yom Tov, and the Rashi mentions over here that this is obvious. You can go onto. There's nothing wrong with going on Yom Tov onto the sukkah that's on top of a wagon or on top of a boat, and the reason why it mentions it is really because the second half of Mishnah talks about cases where you can't go on Yom Tov. So therefore, it mentions here that you can go on Yom Tov. It is interesting about going onto a boat on Yom Tov. Is that something that's for sure allowed or not? But the understanding is that even though there might be a problem going onto a boat on Yom Tov, here you're doing for a mitzvah, a tzarich mitzvah, so it's not an issue at all, and you would be allowed to go on Yom Tov. Now the Mishnah continues and then says other cases. What happens if it's b'roish ha'ilon? You made your sukkah on the top of a tree, oyal gabi gomel, or on top of a camel. So here you built the sukkah in a way. You made, of course, walls and so on, but the sukkah is on top of a tree, and being that it's on top of a tree, so we'll see as the Mishnah continues, says there's a problem going into it on Yom Tov. And the other case was al gabi gomel, on top of an animal, and on top of a camel. So it says it is ksheira, it's kosher. Vein oil Yom Tov, you can't go up in it on Yom Tov. Interestingly, Rashi says that it's kosher for Chol HaMoed, and even on Yom Tov, if you went in it, you did fulfill your obligation. You're not allowed to go in it on Yom Tov, but if you did, you actually fulfilled your obligation. Interesting that Rashi adds that point there. You know, that what happens if you did go? You're not allowed to go on it, but if you did. It's still you did do the mitzvah of sukkah. You just you weren't supposed to go. You did a sin of the rabbinic. You transgressed a rabbinic law. Now you're not allowed to go on Yom Tov. What's the reason? Because we're afraid that you're going to break off a branch of a tree, and you're not allowed to go on a tree because we're afraid you'll break. You're not allowed to even lean on a tree and so on. There's problems with trees. Even if you have a swing on a tree is problematic, and hammocks are problematic on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because you're really not supposed to use a tree on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So it's a gzeira shema yidloish, you might break off a branch, so on. Now the Mishnah says it's ksheira ve'ein oil no b'yom tov. The next case of Mishnah, shtayim ba'ilon v'yachas b'dei yodam. Shtayim ba'ilon, the way Rashi translates it over here is, it's interesting. Rashi in Shabbos does translate it differently. Rashi over here understands, we're talking about that you have a sukkah that is two of its it's got three supports. Two of them are in the tree, and one is bidei adam, which means that the sukkah is above the ground, and the floor of the sukkah is in the tree, but there is and two of the walls are supported by the tree, and the third wall, which is the way Rashi seems to understand these cases, that there's basically three walls to these sukkahs. Except one case, we'll see that there's a fourth wall, but the understanding is there's three walls. Two of the walls next to each other are being supported by with the they have walls, they have the floor, they're supported by the tree, and one of them is supported on its own onto the floor. It's got a handmade wall which is also support beam all the way down to the floor, and so it's two are the tree, shtayim be'ilan, two in the tree, biachas b'dei adam, one is man-made, and oishtayim b'dei adam, or two are man-made, biachas be'ilan, and one of them is in the tree, and basically it's supported by the tree. Sheira, such a sukkah is kosher. Vein oilan la b'yom tov, you would not be allowed to go into it and up it on Yom Tov. Can't go up into it on Yom Tov because again it's being supported by a tree. What about shalosh b'dei adam what happens if you have three sides of it are all supported on the ground? The achas be'ilon, and one of them is supported in the, one of them is supported by the tree. So you got four walls in this case, and in this case it says it's kosher, kshera, it's kosher, and va'oilan la b'yom tov, and you could even go on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. You could even go, because even if that fourth wall would fall down, or the tree would fall down, if the tree was even if the tree was taken away, the sukkah would still be solid. You're not being supported by the tree.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
On the Gemara where they fill in the words that are missing. So he says he fills in, it's the first day of the Yontif. I don't know why that's different. I mean, I understand by Chol Hamoed, but the last days of Yontif, it would be permissible. Only on the first day, it's not.
I'll tell you why. In Israel, the only Yom Tov day of Sukkot is the first day.
Right, but what about the last days?
The last day is in Eretz Yisrael, the Shmini Atzeres, where you don't sit in a sukkah.
Oh, okay, I get it. Okay.
So that's yeah. So the Mishnah continues on page 23a. The Mishnah says, Zaklal, this is the rule. Kol she'inot la'ilon, any case where if you would take away the tree, and it could stand on its own, keshera, the sukkah would be kosher, and you could actually go up into that sukkah on Yom Tov, or as well as on Shabbos, and it's not a problem because it's not considered to be relying, supported by the tree. Okay, so that's the mission. Of course, it brings up some Gemaras. It brings up some memories of some of the Gemaras that we dealt with before. Now we'll get into it. The Gemara here on page 23a mentions the Machlekes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Gamliel. Mani Masnisim. Who does the Mishnah go like? Who is the author of the Mishnah that says that a sukkah is kosher on top of a boat? And the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva. This follows the view of Rabbi Akiva, the Tanya, because it was taught in a brisa. A person built his sukkah on top of a boat. So a question if it's supposed to also say Bereish HaGola here or not, but let's just read it with Bereish HaSfina. He built his sukkah on top of a boat. Rabbi Gamliel, Paisel, Rabbi Gamliel says it's invalid. Rabbi Akiva, Machshir. Rabbi Akiva says it's kosher. There's a machlokes, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva. A sukkah on a boat. Then it says, Maisa, Rabbi Gamliel, the story with Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva. Shayubayin Besvina, they were coming on a boat. They were traveling. The sukkahs. Amad Rabbi Akiva got up. The also sukkah Bereish HaSfina. He made a sukkah on the top of the boat. L'machar nashva ruach v'akarta. The next day, the wind came and blew it and uprooted it. Amar Rabbi Gamliel, Akiva, echad sukkascha. So Rabbi Gamliel comes and tells him, Rabbi Akiva, no, where's your sukkah? Well, what's with your sukkah that you claim is kosher? Where is it? So he was basically trying to prove him, how could you have even thought that such a sukkah should be kosher? It can't be kosher. You see, it blew off. So Rabbi Gamliel, in his sort of like sarcastic way of speaking, says, no, where's your sukkah? Like, you see that it's really, it can't be kosher sukkah. Okay, so now the Gemara comes to explain what the opinions, so what was Rabbi Akiva's view? What's Rabbi Gamliel's view? Amar Abaye. Abaye says, the Kuli Alma, everyone agrees. Eicha de'ena yachayla lamei baruch mitzuya diabosha. Where it's not able to stand with a regular wind of the dry land wind, meaning on regular land. If there's a sukkah that can't handle the winds, loy klum he, it is not worth anything. It's not kosher. It's not called even a diras ara. It's not even called a temporary dwelling. What happens if it could handle a unregular, uncommon, what would a better word be? A wind that's
Uncommon.
not unusual, yeah, an uncommon or unusual wind
Typical.
of dry land.
Typical.
Kulayama, like pligi dikshera. Everyone agrees that, of course, that sukkah is kosher. In other words, like hurricane winds here, or just a much bigger wind that's not used to. It's not used to coming. When you have such winds, if the sukkah can handle that, it's kosher. Even if in the ocean it can't handle a uncommon wind, but that's not a problem. If it could handle the uncommon wind of Yabasha, which is basically the Gemara's term of an uncommon wind of Yabasha, at least one of the commentaries says that means that's the common wind of the ocean. So it would be similar. In other words, this is a sukkah that could handle regular winds on the ocean. Now, when you go on the ocean, you go out. Some days are normal, and once in a while, you'll have a day that it's extraordinary winds. And that is what this sukkah maybe can't handle. But it could handle the regular normal winds of a ocean, of the ocean. And the term that the Gemara uses is it could handle the Eina Matsuya Diabasha, could handle the unusual winds of dry land, which are basically similar to the Ruach Mitsuya, the regular winds of the ocean. Oh. So Kuliyama like Pligi Dikshera, everyone agrees that such a sukkah would be kosher, even though when it's a bad day in the ocean, it's actually going to blow off your sukkah. That's not a problem. Your sukkah is kosher as long as it's standing there. Now, Ki Pligi, but when does Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva, when do they argue? That it could handle a sukkah that's strong enough to handle a regular wind, dry land. And it's not able to handle the ruach mitsuya, the regular winds of an ocean. So
they take out the word de'eno?
Yeah, it seems like there's a
de'eno, because it makes sense, because otherwise it doesn't work logically.
1 second here. Here you have an aleph. And whose gears is this? Kach gears is a Tosfos La'el. Baruch Mitzuya Diyam. This is the gears of Tosfos from before. So I read it a little differently than it says it. The way it says it, let me just the way the wording in the Gemara is, when do they argue? If it could handle Ruach Mitzuya of Yabasha, ve'eni yochel la'amoid Ruach she'ena Mitzuya Yabasha. No, it would seem like it's very similar. They just yeah,
because the Eina Mitzuya, if you read it with the Eina Mitzuya, it's much stronger than the land. It has to be that it can withstand the regular wind on the ground. Right. But it cannot withstand a regular wind on the boat.
Or, which is the same as Ruach She'ena Matsuya of Yabasha is the same as Ruach Matsuya Diyam. So the question is, which one should the wording be? It's the same thing, really. Right. Or the way I read it is the Ruach Matsuya Diyam. I have both gearses in my Gemara. It has both options. The Agois Tziyunim seems to switch it. But it seems to me like it could be the other way as well. They switch it because they found that the Tosfos, the Rosh, and the Ran seem to have this girsa, but I don't know if it really makes a difference in halacha. They just switch it because they found earlier prints that has it this way. But in halacha, it's seemingly the same. Why do I say it's the same? Because basically what we're dealing with is there's 4 types of winds, and 2 of them are really the same. There's regular winds of dry land. There's extraordinary winds of the ocean. Those are the 2 extremes when you have unusual winds in the ocean. And then the middle case is really the same. It's the same. You have extraordinary winds or unusual winds of dry land, which are the regular winds on the ocean. So those 2 cases are seemingly the same. And that's what our Mishnah was dealing with. And that's what the Gemara here, the Brisa, seems to be dealing with as well. Whereas the case of the argument, it's the case, the middle case, where something can handle. I'm almost done. You have to wait 5 moments. Okay, come back. You have to come back in 5 minutes. Okay. I can't find it. You have to ask someone else. So the Gemara says that Abaye is saying, so where do they argue? They argue in this case where it's strong. It would be good. This would be a perfect sukkah for if it was on regular someone's backyard, but it's not so perfect because it's on the ocean and it's susceptible to the winds. It's vulnerable to the winds of the ocean.
That is Mitsuya,
regular wind. Mitsuya,
on the ocean.
On the ocean, it's a regular wind. It's vulnerable to such a wind. And Rabbi Gamliel Sukkah Diras Keva, and Rabbi Gamliel says you need to have a Sukkah Diras Keva. It has to be fit to use regularly. And Bekivan De'ena Yechayla Lamay Baruch Mitsuya Diam, since it can't fit for this regular wind of the ocean, Lav Klumi, it is worthless. It's not worth anything. Rabbi Kiva Savar Sukkah Diras Arai Beinan. The sukkah needs to be a Diras Arai, a temporary dwelling, and which means that even though
it can't stand up to a Ruach Mitsuya on the water.
It's not going to last that long.
It does on land.
As long as it could handle a dry land,
Ruach Mitsuya,
dry land wind, regular wind, it will be kosher. And of course, this opinion does sound a little surprising because the sukkah the fact is, it's on the ocean. If it was on dry land, I would understand Rebbe Akiva very well. But the fact is, the sukkah is in the ocean, and this sukkah doesn't seem like it's going to last. Now, there are times in the ocean where it's very quiet. And so, true, the sukkah could last for a little while, but still, how could Rebbe Akiva learn? So this is the question we're going to end off with, is the opinion of Rebbe Akiva does seem a little surprising that he would hold such a thing, that it's going to be good enough to use as a sukkah, even though it really can't handle the winds in the place where it is.
The sukkah can't stand where it's supposed to stand.
Yeah, it's on an ocean.
Well, maybe it makes a difference if you're putting it on a boat in dock, or you're putting it on the boat when you're out in the open sea. It's very different. So just ala sfina is kosher. If you're going to go out with it, you're getting into all kinds of questions. Mm-hmm. Or according to Rabbi Kiva, if you're out there and it's blowing, this was like a felach. If it stood up when it was here, it's fine.
So this is an interesting point that you bring out. Like the sukkah is on the water. It's right at the edge between dry land and the ocean. So that would be an interesting scenario because it's really in between. In other words, the winds are starting to get stronger when you go away, out there on the water. And in addition to the fact that the waves are causing the sukkah as well. Like, in other words, it's not just the winds. It
The
would seem to be
rocking.
also the rocking of the boat. Maybe would do something. So that's an interesting point. But anyway, the commentaries do deal with this. But we're gonna stop here, and we're gonna talk about it a little more tomorrow.
Rabbi,
Sei gesund, everyone.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Rabbi, it
Yes,
seems to
David.
be saying here that Rabbi Gamliel is emphasizing that a sukkah we require permanent residence, and Rabbi Akiva says that a sukkah requires a temporary residence.
Right. That's what
That's
the Gemara
true.
just said.
That Gemara says those words. The question is, and that we've seen throughout the entire tractate, that there seems to be this debate, and we saw it. I think it was on Daf Dalet, where you had a lot of opinions, different levels of how permanent, even if you do hold it permanent, how permanent it has to be. Nevertheless, this seems to take it extreme that you would be allowed to have a sukkah very temporary. I mean, it's not even able to handle it. It's almost like you're building a sukkah, you know it's going to blow off soon. And yet Rabbi Akiva seems to say that it's going to be kosher.
Al Haspina. The question is where on the Yam? It's still
Anyway,
Al
we'll see.
Haspina, no matter what. That doesn't change.
Yeah, but the point is, I mean, he's basically saying it's going to blow off. It's going to
When
blow
you're
off
out
soon.
there, it's going to blow off. So you're going to
Okay,
pull over and you're going to dock when you're going to sit to eat because you can't have a sukkah that's, all hands are loose over there.
Right.
It's almost like
Okay.
it's almost like Kiddush Levana. Can you say the bracha now? You can see the Levana, but in a couple of minutes you can't see the Levana. So is it okay to say the bracha or not okay to say the bracha?
So that's different
Well,
because
the question is Al Haspina first. It's not standing, it's moving on a water. So there the halacha is it's fine. The question is how sturdy does it have to be? Now you're getting into the argument between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva.
Rabbi,
So
can I just
about what
intervene
you said, David, just one second, Moshe. What you said, David, is not exactly the same type of situation because Kiddush Levana is not a law that you have to say Kiddush Levana when the moon is going to be visible for a certain amount of time. As long as you can say the bracha when it's visible, then you're fine. The law of sukkah is different. This is not called a sukkah if it's going to topple over. The moon is called a moon, even if it's going to be invisible. It's still going to call the moon. As long as you can see it now, you can say the bracha. The sukkah is not a sukkah. It's lav klumhi. That's the problem with the sukkah. The sukkah, if it's going to topple over, then you can't say that it's considered even a hut dwelling. It's not a dwelling. It's not a sukkah.
inside of a bread?
So
Yes,
the visibility
What about-
is not whether
what
it's a
about if the
permanent or
boat is
temporary
parked?
visibility.
Yeah.
if a boat is
totally different rules.
docked, if a boat is docked in a littoral or an ocean stream or in a riparian stream, there could be differences even in that. That's what I mean, doesn't that?
All right,
isn't
we'll
there a
talk a little
difference?
tomorrow. We'll talk a little about it tomorrow.
One
to
makes
be
your
continued.
stomach jiggle 5 times, the other one makes your stomach jiggle 4 times.
Okay. Have a
Thank
good
you,
day, everyone.
Rabbi.
Thank you.